Alright guys, another day, another video. So I have a special announcement today. My full stack web development book has released. It is currently available on Amazon and Pact Publishing. The title of the book is Full Stack React, TypeScript and Node. And it also covers GraphQL, deployment onto AWS Linux and Nginx web server, and it also covers Redux and React hooks. It is an A to Z end-to-end full stack web development book. So by the time you're done with the book, you should be able to have a complete working project that you can deploy onto cloud, or you can even deploy onto your own server if that's what you want to do. So I'm going to leave a 20% discount code in the description below and check it out. All right, let's get going. So in today's video, we're going to basically finish up most of the comment screen, and we're going to be able to write our own comments onto the screen, which will trigger a refresh and then update all of the data. So as you recall, we have our Vapor backend and we already created the add comment call. So we're now going to be making URL session calls into this post updating call. That's what we're going to learn today. All right, guys, so let's get started. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to update our API service, comments API, and the function add comment. We're going to do the same thing that we've been doing basically this whole time. And we're going to first create that URL. It's based off the domain root, and then of course it's comments on the sub. Now in this case we are going to have a payload, so we need the URL request. And then we're going to call this an application JSON call, meaning the content type is of type application JSON. And then we're going to do the method, which is going to be type post. So we need the try catch or the do catch, because any encoding or decoding is a throwable statement, and we are not allowing throws in this function because we don't need to. So in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to use that encoder instance and we're going to encode, but we are going to encode not a comment type, but we're going to encode a new type called DTO, Comment Dto. So we're going to encode that. So before I continue, let's go ahead and create that. So I will show you in a bit why I'm making this a class instead of a struct. But let me flesh it out first. So we're going to override the equals sign. We've already done this in some of our previous videos. And of course, I'm going to define these fields in a moment. I'm having to define this constructor because for classes you don't automatically get one for free. So that's why I'm doing that. Okay. So where we're getting these fields from, or why we're doing this, is our model is a little bit heavy. There's lots of stuff that I don't need to send back as a payload parameter to our add comment function. And some of these fields are entire objects, right? Which is not useful as a parameter to our add comment, because our add comment is having its own DTO, right? Very similar, right? Now the reason why we don't need an owner in our client-side model is because we still don't have our authentication system built out yet. So I'm still using the randomly generated user selection to just randomly select a user and then put them in to the comment that's added to the database. So that's why we're going ahead and doing a user query to get all the users, which returns a list of all the users. Then we randomly generate an index for this array, and then we use that index to get a random user or a random user ID, and then build the comment out from that. So all right, so that's why we're doing that. And we're going to be, again, using this as the payload. So the other thing that we want to do is, because in every web API call that you're ever going to make, in particular the ones that are doing updates, delete, stuff like that, you most of the time want to do some sort of validation. So we're going to create an enum, and it's going to help us handle some of the different cases and the different ways that certain fields can be inputted. I'm just going to copy and paste this stuff. So it's going to help us catch certain field combinations that we don't want, and then we'll be able to, produce an invalid message when we see those combinations. And we'll get into that once I start writing that particular piece of code, but this is what that enum is going to be about. So then we have our actual model, meaning the fields and core class specific stuff that we want. So just to keep things clean, I'm going to create the functions inside of extension so that we keep things a little bit clean and easier to read. Any of you guys have done C#.NET development? This is it doesn't exist for the same purposes, but this is in effect a lot like creating a partial class, basically. All right, so the first one we're gonna check the validation for is we're gonna see if there is an @ sign inside of the text, the comment of the text that we're about to send, and that the parent comment ID, meaning that hierarchical structure of the comments where, yes, a comment may either be the most root comment or it may be, a child or a response to somebody else's comment. So what we're doing here is what I noticed in the Instagram, the Reel app, when you click reply in the comment section, it will give you an @ and then the username of the person that you're replying to. So in that case, in this case, when you're not doing a reply to somebody, you're just generally commenting to the content, then this comment ID should be null because you're basically at the root level in that case, right? So that's the situation that this thing is trying to catch. So we're going to return this parent comment ID not allowed in that event. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. And then the next one is when we do have the @ right? This is when we don't. This is when we do. And our comment ID is nil. That's also the wrong thing to do because we're claiming that we're responding to somebody, and yet we're not giving that somebody's comment ID as the parent. So that's also an invalid condition. So we're going to return for that. And then otherwise, we're going to return valid. Okay? All right. So now we've got our payload, data transfer object, payload object, whatever you want to call it, fleshed out. I don't know why my Xcode is so slow, but a lot of times, unless I try to rebuild or otherwise try to do something, these non-valid error messages keep showing up. What's going on here? All right, this is not a function. All right, so now in this case, our call on the Vapor side does actually return the newly created object, but we don't need it I always forget to add this thing, but we don't need it. So I'm not going to bother getting it back and decoding it, because then I have to wrestle with all of the issues in terms of decoding JSON from the Vapor server, because they do some stuff with the date object and some of the parent optional relationships. So I'm not going to get that back. But what I do want to do is when this call completes, I want the screen. Okay, it's not loaded anymore. Let me just reload it. I want the screen to refresh itself, right? So we're going to have another callback. And we don't need any parameters. We just want to allow the caller to refresh the list of comments once this work is complete. All right, so after that, we need to come back in here, because remember how we broke up the two screens, one comment screen and one home screen where all the tabs are, right? So we're going to go to the view that lists out each of the comments list, and then we have a folder called views because we have more than one view. And then this is the view model that's feeding into all of those three views. So we're going to update this and transform this into a Comment Dto so that we can have some of the other related fields like the parent comment ID instead of just the text itself. So I'm going to look at my notes. So we're going to call it Comment Dto. And we're going to make it nullable because when you first load the screen, you know, there's nothing has been selected, so there's nothing to put in there. And then this we're putting into our view model. If you may recall from the previous videos, this is what triggers our add comment view, the little this guy down here triggers this to show up with the keyboard and stuff like that. So we're going to add this to our view model so that it can be triggered from our views as needed, right? So initially it's going to be false for obvious reasons. And then I want to make this call reusable before I get rid of it. This is what is getting the comments, right? So I want to be able to call this separately after my call to add comments was successful. So I'm going to put this into a function. And then we'll make sure it gets loaded in the initializer. Okay, and now that I've updated this, obviously we're going to get errors in some of our other stuff. And we also need to refactor that code anyway. So then if I come back in here, the first thing that I want to do is when we are actually ready, I want to initialize that comment DTO, right? It's not going to have really anything valid, but it's going to have an actual object instance. All right, I forgot about this. So the comments, whether it's this comment or the other comment, it doesn't matter. A comment object is, of course, something that is commenting on a piece of user content. So therefore, a reference to that parent user content ID is non-nullable. Okay, so then initially I was going to put this into the view model right here, but then I realized that because, although we haven't created this yet, because oftentimes we are going to be transitioning from, or we're going to be navigating from the home view to the comments view or screen, right? And then when we create our other screens, we're going to be bouncing around. It makes more sense to put this into the global store. The global store. So that's what we're going to do. I'm going to put it into the global store. Now, because we're not ready to do transitioning between the different screens, I went to my database and I just found a random user contents ID and I hard coded it to initialize it with that ID. And then later on, once we create the selection mechanism where when the user is on the home screen and they click either the add comment button or the view comments button, then we'll set this to the proper, user content button. Then we'll set this to the proper user content at that time. But now that we've created this field inside of store, we should come back here, and at least this bottom part should stop failing. Okay, so it did. And then of course we modified this. So that's why it's giving us an error. But this guy and this guy need to be updated with our Comment Dto object, our single Comment Dto object, because what has to happen is internally, if you recall, this guy ultimately is just reusing the comment item view object. So inside of here is all of the selection code for the text and then the trigger to reply is all in here. This file is just the a container, but it's really this guy that's doing all of the work. So in here is some of the comment, the parent comment, right? And related comments that are going to be coming out. And then in here, on the action part of the button, if we click reply, we're going to fill out that Comment Dto, fill out the text, fill out the parent ID. We've already set the parent user content ID, so we don't need to worry about that. But we're going to flesh all of that out in here in the action. So that's what this code path is about. And then once that is done, right, and that button click triggers the update of the Comment Dto, the single Comment Dto that is inside of the view model, that will also be passed to our add comment view, the thing that actually sends out the text to the server. So that API call add comment that we just created in the API service up here, we're going to be refactoring this code to make that call with the proper comment DTO, not this guy, that has been updated from this code path. So that's the plan that we're going to have to implement. So in order to do that, we need to refactor this guy first of all. So since this is coming from a view model, this comment DTO related data is coming from a view model, and that view model is using property wrappers. I'm going to make this a binding, and we're going to grab that comment DTO, and we're also going to grab the show subtext field, right? We're going to leave the other field in there. And then before we continue, let's just clean this up. Okay, the reason why we're calling the $ version of the property wrapper right here is because we're sending it in as a binding, and therefore we need the projected value and its member. So that's what we're doing here. And then if we go back in here, now that we've completed this section, we now have to update these two instances of the same view so that these guys can now be passed down. So then we'll go here. I'm just going to put these at the top. They're also going to be bindings for the same reason. Okay, so we need to be able to pass these guys down to the text-like view. And in order to do that, I'm going to just repeat what I just did. So I'm going to copy and paste it. Just making sure I didn't forget anything. And then before I move on, let me just fill in the initializer parameters. Again, we're using the projection because we're passing it down outside of our current view, right? We're passing it to a different scope. Obviously, this is a different scope, so we need to use our projection. The projection is publicly accessible. The property wrapper instance, which looks like this, is not publicly accessible. It is only accessible within its declaration. So therefore, we're using the projected syntax. Okay, so now our errors went away. Yeah. So this took me a while to get, and I'm going to show you guys a really nice link that I found that really explains property wrappers in the simplest way that I've been able to see. Much better than the way that it's explained in the Apple documentation. But let me just write this out first. So because we are inside of the scope where these fields are declared, we can use the instance member of the property wrapper type to set it to the binding, because that's the type of this property wrapper. So we can set it directly in this manner, because again, this allows internal access. All right. Just want to check that I haven't forgotten anything. All right, cool. So now that we have initialized our two new fields, right? We just did it, passed it up here, right? Now I want to take all of that info, and when somebody is doing a response, I want to flesh it out. I want to fill it out with all of the appropriate data. All right, so a lot of stuff going on here. Let's unpack this because it's quite subtle what is happening here. First of all, from left to right, the question might be, why can I make a call like this and, you know, set it to something, right? Why am I not using one of the other, or, you know, this? So this is the article that I found, and I would highly recommend that you guys take a look at this article. It makes understanding property wrappers so much easier, because when you first look at it, you might think that you understand it, but when you start really digging into it, and I'm going to show you a few other mechanisms of passing around property wrappers when we refactor our add comment view, that you might be surprised you need to do. So definitely take a look at this article if you haven't seen it already. But the big thing that I want to talk about is this little bit of comment stuff right here. So if you look at this, he has declared and instantiated a property wrapper, right? His own custom wrapper. So when you just call that wrapper variable by its name straight up, then you get the actual wrapper value, okay? And that's why we are able to call it explicitly, right? And then set it directly, okay? And set one of its members directly. And this also has something to do with the fact that it's optional, which I'm going to show you the ramifications of that in a little bit. But that's one thing. So then the other thing is that the _x is the wrapper instance itself, meaning the code that sits around the actual value. Okay, so this is the way to access it. However, this syntax right here, is only accessible from within the scope of the declaration. So when you want to pass this guy around in a writable way, then you need, this is where this $sign comes in. So I'm sure that, maybe a lot of you guys are very comfortable with property wrappers, but a lot of you guys, I'm sure, have seen, sometimes this syntax, and then sometimes this syntax, and then sometimes this one, and it's hard to determine, which one you're supposed to use when. And I think this list makes that pretty clear. All right, so after we set that, I want to set the text. And then this is the reason why I had to create the validation inside of the Comment Dto type before. So the Comment Dto, the text field, actually in the real app itself, whenever you click the reply button, it will pre-populate that text field with @ and the username of the comment that you're responding to. So in order to mimic that, I am doing this. And here I just want to give a little bit of a gap between the username and your own text, the user's text. All right, so again, we've declared our parent because we know that if it's a reply, it will have a parent. We've declared what the text prefix is, and of course the user will fill in the rest of their text after the reply button is clicked and the add comment view pops up with the keyboard. And then we also, just in case the comment view is not being fully shown, we want to make sure that it does, and therefore we set this to true. All right, let's see. Okay, that was expected. All right, that was expected. Yep. So we're going to start here and just finish up everything that we did. And just to be super clear, we are getting these errors here because we created these two new bindings and we have to pass them in. And we haven't done that yet, so we're going to do that right now. All right, so just want to check something real quick. All right, so we're going to put the same exact thing in here. So we'll build again, and then we'll have that add comment view error. So this is the last item that we need to refactor. So now we're going to go to this guy, and we're going to make sure that our new binding data is coming in. So again, we're going to convert into the Comment Dto type. We have already the show sub because this was already in place from before in order to show or hide this view. And then secondarily, we're going to have, if you recall the callback that we created in the API service for add comment, because we wanted to allow when this completed to allow a refreshing of all the comments. So since this guy is going to trigger the post back to that actual add comment call, we're going to require from the parent of this add comment view a closure for that callback. I hope that makes sense. All right. So here is the interesting additional thing that I discovered about these property wrappers. So as I was saying before, Comment Dto is optional. So if this wasn't optional, it actually would let me access the text field of the Comment Dto and then pass it to this guy so it could update properly. But because this is optional, I don't think this is a bug. I think this is just a limitation of how property bindings work. But because this is optional, I don't have access to those fields. Okay, but after doing some investigation, I was able to get some help on the Swift forums. If you haven't tried them, you should definitely give them a try. There's a lot of very, very, very technical people on there. But basically what I discovered is that the binding type, right? The binding property wrapper type has an overload that represents the getters and the setters, and you could override these. And by overriding them, that means that you can pass in fields of an optional property wrapper by passing in the wrapped value. Remember, that's without this underscore or the $sign, right? This is the actual value inside, right? Because a property wrapper, as the name implies, is its purpose is to reuse the getter and setter logic, right? Irrespective of what the value is, right? So in the sense that a class is sort of a template that allows you to create or recreate multiple instances according to a certain set of rules that the class defines. A property wrapper is doing the same thing, where the logic of the getters and setters, meaning the property, is reusable without you having to, do this first, now do this, now do this other thing, without you having to type all of that logic out every single time. A property wrapper is just going to allow you to define it once, just like a class, and then just reuse it over and over again with different values. So by overriding the binding, you're able to inject your own code into that process, right? So in this case, we're having the text field. All right, that error message was confusing me because I wasn't expecting it. All right, so yeah, we're able to now handle this optional property wrapper by just injecting our intent with one of the overloads of the initializer for binding. So we're going to do that again. Just copying and pasting it because it's the exact same code. And just to be super clear, we need to do this because it's expecting text. Right? It's expecting text. So that's why we have to do this. So we pass in the text field, and now it's expecting text and it's getting text as expected, and it's allowed to modify the text of the appropriate instance as expected. So then, after that, we're going to override our button action. And this is the post button on the add comment view on the right hand side. So we're going to override this guy. And the first thing that we're going to do is check if it's valid by using that is valid call that we created earlier. So if it is valid, then we're just going to make a call to our API service. Just going to clean this code up a little bit. So here's our callback that's supposed to refresh all of our comments. And then I want to wipe out the text that's sitting there after the comment is successfully completed. So that's what this line is about. So again, if it's valid, then we go ahead and we call the add comment. Now, if it's not valid in the way of parent comment ID not allowed, I'm just going to assume that that was a, how should I say, a refresh mistake, a refreshing mistake, and I'm going to wipe it out for them. And then I'm just going to run my API service. And then if both cases fail, I'm going to end it with this error. So we're going to get all the parameter stuff, related stuff, failing because we haven't updated that yet. But while I'm in here, I just want to make sure I did not skip anything. All right. So let's one by one fix this guy. So we have no more comment txt. Let's just clean this up. All right, so we have to update the other references to add comment view. You may recall that we are reusing this call in the mini add comment view, which is part of the home, the tab screens. So we have to update this there. Where is this thing? Okay, we're gonna do this in a couple of places. So I didn't want to, rewrite this every single time. So we're going to create this function. Same basic change here. Again, we're trying to use the actual wrap value because we can't pass in the $sign in here for this guy because it's optional. So that's why we're doing this. Thought I was creating a vanilla property. All right. All right. So if we were just to kind of drive the point home. So this is optional. So obviously text is not going to come out, right? Because it's optional. But even if we try and handle the optionality, text still isn't available. Because again, I believe this is a limitation with property wrappers. But if we send in the binding and then I rebuild, as you can see, it's accepted, right? So this guy right here, which is not using the wrapper instance itself, it's using the value directly and also making it editable. So anyway, this is what we're going to add, and we're going to do this in a couple of different places, which is why I wanted to make it a function. So those errors went away, and now we have to update the add comment view. So this guy is going to be DTO. So I'm going to put in an empty callback right here That's what the error was about. So we'll just do that. And then let's see if this bad boy works. All right, so it did load. So then as you can see, I've been adding a bunch of stuff to this one comment right here. So let's switch things a little bit and just add to this guy. So as you can see, when I click reply, it goes to, whoever the person is that I'm trying to reply to. So test ABC. Test ABC. The keyboard didn't show up because I didn't enable it. This is the first time that I ever ran this app after the build, so that's why the keyboard didn't show up. But as you can see, it is working. If I want to put it into the root, there it is, because there's no prefix of a username, so it shows up at the root. Sweet. So that was doing an add, meaning a write action to the Vapor server. Again, check out my book. If you are into web development as well as iOS, like I said, it's a complete A to Z book. So you should be having a fully functional, no features missing, fully working web application where you don't need any other additional pieces like Firebase or Lambda, AWS Lambda, or any other such thing. You can put it on the cloud. You can put it just on a regular server that you might have. So thanks for watching. Like if the video was helpful, and see you next time.